When I first bought the old house on Hillcrest Avenue, it felt like a steal. 3 stories tall with a wraparound porch, creaky wooden floors, and more history than I'd ever cared to learn. It was the kind of place I dreamed of since I was a kid. I told myself the peeling paint and faint smell of mildew were just quirks, things I could fix over time. The realtor said it had been vacant for decades, which might explain the price. But honestly, it just felt too good to be true. From the moment I walked in, though, something about the house felt off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just the way the air felt heavier inside, like it was pressing down on my chest. Or the way my own footsteps echoed in strange patterns, as though someone were walking just a step behind me. But I brushed it off. New house jitters, I thought. Every creak and groan of the place probably came from age and neglect. The first night, I didn't sleep much. Between the draft whistling through the windows and the persistent ticking of an old grandfather clock in the hall, one I didn't even remember seeing during the walkthrough, I was a wreck. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, a sound jolted me upright. Thud, thud, thud. It was faint but deliberate, coming from somewhere above me. My heart thudded in sync with the noise. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, cursing myself for not replacing the dead bulbs in the hallway yet. As I stepped out of the bedroom, the temperature dropped sharply, and my breath came out in wispy clouds. The air smelled strange, like old metal, damp and acrid. The thudding sound was louder now, echoing down from the attic. I stood frozen at the base of the narrow staircase that led up to it, trying to convince myself to climb. Then, the sound stopped. I swallowed hard, gripping the rickety handrail as I made my way up, one step at a time. The wooden planks creaked beneath my weight, every sound amplified by the stillness of the house. At the top of the stairs, I hesitated before pushing the attic door open. The room was dark, but my flashlight cut through the shadows. Dust particles swirled in the beam, and my stomach churned as I stepped inside. The attic was mostly empty, save for a few old trunks and broken furniture. But then I saw it. In the far corner, where the slanted ceiling dipped low, was a small wooden chair. It was rocking gently, creaking as though someone had just risen from it. My blood ran cold. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. That's when I noticed the writing on the wall behind it, faint but unmistakable, "Get out." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. Before I could process what I'd seen, the chair tipped over violently on its own, the force of it slamming into the floor with a deafening crash. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural, coming from right behind me. "You're not supposed to be here." I didn't run, I bolted. My legs carried me down the attic stairs so fast I nearly lost my footing. The whispering hadn't followed me, but it echoed in my head, a sinister loop of words that made my skin crawl. By the time I reached my bedroom, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, gasping for breath. "You're not supposed to be here." I tried to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was exhaustion, the stress of moving into a new place. Maybe I imagined the writing, the chair, and the voice. But deep down, I knew better. I slept with the lights on that night, or tried to. The hours crawled by as every little creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. Around 5 a.m., I drifted off, only to wake abruptly when sunlight streamed through the window. The attic felt like a bad dream, but I couldn't shake the lingering unease. Determined to ground myself, I spent the day unpacking boxes and tidying up. I avoided the attic entirely. By evening, I was starting to feel normal again until I walked past the bathroom mirror. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A shadow, darker than the dim light in the room, darted across the glass. I stopped, my heart pounding as I turned to face the mirror. At first, there was nothing unusual, just my reflection staring back, looking as pale and tired as I felt. But then I noticed something in the background. The bathroom door was open, and beyond it, in the hallway, a figure stood watching me. It wasn't human. Its outline was vaguely humanoid, but its features were warped, as if someone had sketched it in charcoal and then smudged the lines. Its eyes, if they could even be called that, were empty, gaping voids that seemed to devour the dim light around them. I spun around, expecting to see it standing behind me, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. I stumbled back into the bedroom, slamming the bathroom door shut as I went. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. But who could I tell? "Hey, I think my house might be haunted" wasn't exactly a conversation starter. Instead, I decided to distract myself. I opened the laptop to research the property. If something weird was happening, maybe the house had a history. What I found only made things worse. The first article that popped up was a news report from 1973. A young family had lived here back then, a couple and their daughter. The headline read, "Family disappears without a trace. Police baffled." I skimmed the article, my stomach twisting. Neighbors had reported hearing screams one night, but when police arrived, the house was empty. No signs of a struggle. No bodies. Nothing. The article mentioned rumors about the house being cursed or evil, but police dismissed them. The investigation went cold, and the house remained empty for years. Until now. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. What have I walked into? Just as I was about to close the laptop, a chill swept through the room, and my bedroom door creaked open. Slowly. I froze. The air felt heavy again, like in the attic. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the open doorway. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, I heard the faintest sound, a low, mournful cry. It wasn't just eerie. It sounded like a child. The cry echoed faintly, a haunting sound that seemed to seep into the walls. It started soft but grew louder with each passing second, like it was moving closer. My body froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like they were cemented to the floor. The cry was unmistakable now, a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, sobbing in a way that pulled at something primal in me. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling. No response. The crying continued, rising and falling like the wail of wind through a hollow tree. Against all better judgment, I stepped toward the doorway, gripping the edge of it for support. Is someone there? The moment I spoke, the crying stopped. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence filled the house, and for a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it all. But then came a different sound, a soft patter-patter, like bare feet running across the hardwood floor upstairs. The attic. I clenched my fists, torn between bolting out of the house and confronting whatever was up there. The thought of a child, or something pretending to be one, roaming the house sent shivers down my spine. But if it was a child, how could I ignore it? I grabbed the flashlight again and crept up the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew colder with every step, and by the time I reached the attic door, my breath was visible in short, panicked bursts. The door was ajar, swinging slightly as though it had been pushed open just moments before. The faint smell of metal and mildew filled my nostrils, stronger than ever. Hello? I called again, pushing the door fully open. The attic looked the same as before, dusty, empty, lifeless. But now, in the far corner where the rocking chair had been, sat a small stuffed bear. Its fur was matted and gray, one button eye missing, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It hadn't been there before. The moment my flashlight landed on it, a sharp, piercing scream filled the attic. I clamped my hands over my ears, nearly dropping the flashlight as I stumbled backward. The scream wasn't human. It was distorted, shrill, like metal scraping against metal. It seemed to come from everywhere, reverberating off the walls and burrowing into my skull. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I lowered my hands cautiously, my ears ringing in the deafening silence that followed. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the room. The bear was gone. I staggered back down the stairs, nearly tripping over myself in my haste to get away. But as I reached the bottom, I noticed something new, a trail of tiny, wet footprints leading from the attic stairs, down the hallway, and toward the living room. I followed them, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out all other sounds. The footprints stopped abruptly at the center of the room, where an old rug lay. Before I could process what I was seeing, the rug began to shift, like something was writhing beneath it. I hesitated for only a moment before gripping the edge of the rug and yanking it aside. Underneath was a trapdoor, its edges worn and splintered. Rusted iron hinges held it in place, and a padlock dangled loosely, as though someone had tried to secure it but given up. The crying started again, muffled now, coming from somewhere beneath the trapdoor. My hand shook as I reached for the padlock. I didn't know what I expected to find down there, but every fiber of my being told me I wasn't prepared for it. The padlock was rusted but not secured. With trembling hands, I pulled it free, and it clattered to the floor, the sound reverberating through the silent house. I hesitated, staring at the trapdoor. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to leave it alone. But the muffled crying persisted, tugging at something deep in me. I gripped the metal ring embedded in the wood and lifted. The trapdoor groaned loudly, its hinges resisting after years of disuse. A damp, earthy smell wafted up, thick and suffocating. My flashlight illuminated a steep set of stairs leading down into what looked like a cellar. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the void below. The crying stopped instantly. I waited, my breath shallow, listening for any sign of movement. The silence stretched on, oppressive and unnatural, but the unease in my chest wouldn't let me leave. I descended slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder, and the smell intensified, a mix of wet soil, rot, and something metallic, like old blood. My flashlight beam wavered, illuminating the narrow stone walls as I went deeper. At the bottom of the stairs, the space opened into a small, low-ceilinged room. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with jars, hundreds of them, coated in grime. I moved closer, shining the light on one. The jar was filled with a cloudy, yellowish liquid, and floating inside was something. It took me a moment to register what I was looking at, a small hand. Not a doll's hand. A real one. I recoiled, nearly dropping the flashlight. My stomach churned as I realized the other jars were filled with similar horrors, teeth, fingers, even what looked like an eyeball staring lifelessly out from its glass prison. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, backing away. That's when I saw it, a set of small footprints in the dirt floor, leading deeper into the cellar. They were fresh, impossibly so, given the years of dust coating everything else. I followed them, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The footprints led to another door, this one smaller and made of heavy wood. It had no handle, just a series of deep scratches across its surface, as though something had clawed at it desperately, trying to get out or in. I leaned closer, pressing my ear to the door. The crying returned, louder and more desperate now, but it wasn't alone. Beneath the sobs was another sound, a low, guttural growl, faint but unmistakable. My heart raced as I stepped back. I didn't want to open that door. Whatever was behind it, it didn't belong in this world. But before I could decide, the growling stopped. And then, from the other side of the door, came 3 deliberate knocks. Knock. 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 I stumbled back, tripping over the uneven floor. My flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows on the walls. The knocks came again, louder this time. Knock. 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 I scrambled to my feet and bolted up the stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. My chest heaved as I backed away, my eyes glued to the floor as if expecting the door to burst open at any second. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper, coming from directly beneath me. "You're not supposed to be here." I didn't sleep that night or the next. Every sound in the house became magnified, every creak and groan feeding my growing paranoia. I avoided the trapdoor like it was a living thing, shoving the heaviest furniture I could find over it, though I doubted that would stop whatever was down there. The whisper, those chilling words, kept replaying in my head. "You're not supposed to be here." On the 3rd day, I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I packed a bag with essentials, grabbed my keys, and headed for the front door. But as I reached for the handle, the door wouldn't budge. I jiggled it harder, then yanked with all my strength, but it was like the door was fused to the frame. The windows, too, every single one I checked was sealed shut. I was trapped. Panic set in. I retreated to the living room, pacing back and forth, my mind racing for answers. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The photos. I'd hung a few family pictures on the wall shortly after moving in, just some snapshots of my parents, a couple of friends, and one of me as a kid. But now, every single photo had changed. The images were distorted, their faces stretched into grotesque masks of agony. Eyes were gouged out, mouths hung open in silent screams, and in the background of every picture was the same dark figure I'd seen in the bathroom mirror. It was closer in each frame, as if it were stalking me through the photos. I ripped the pictures off the wall, my hands shaking. Beneath each frame was something even worse, scratches gouged into the plaster, spelling out words. Watching you. Stay. Mine. My chest tightened as I staggered back, dropping the frames. I tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank, something left over from the house's twisted history. But deep down, I knew the house was alive, its malevolence seeping into every corner. Desperate for answers, I returned to my laptop. I scoured forums, old archives, anything that might explain what was happening. That's when I found it, a blog post from 2008, written by a man named Peter Delaney. Delaney claimed he'd lived in the house for 6 months before fleeing in the dead of night. His post was a rambling, disjointed mess, but one detail stood out: it starts with the whispers. Then the crying. And finally, the watchers. The watchers. As if on cue, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, and I turned slowly, my eyes darting around the room. At first, I didn't see anything. But then I noticed the shadows. They weren't where they should be. The lamp on the table cast a soft, yellow light, but the shadows it threw stretched unnaturally long, curling across the walls and ceiling like dark tendrils. In the corner of the room, a shadow stood where there was nothing to cast it, vague, humanoid, and entirely still. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I opened them again, the shadow had moved closer. My heart pounded as I backed away, but the shadow kept advancing, inching closer with every flicker of the light. It didn't walk or glide, it simply was, shifting impossibly from one place to the next. I bolted upstairs, slamming the door to my bedroom and shoving a chair under the handle. My hands trembled as I reached for the flashlight, desperate to dispel the darkness. The light flickered weakly, its beam barely penetrating the oppressive blackness in the room. And then, I saw it reflected in the mirror above my dresser. The shadow stood at the foot of my bed, watching me with those empty, gaping voids where its eyes should be. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But I swear, I felt it smiling. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I woke up to a sharp, stinging pain on my arm. The room was eerily quiet, bathed in the pale gray light of early morning. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, some horrible hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. Then I saw the scratches. Thin, red lines carved into the flesh of my forearm, spelling out a single word: leave. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over myself. The scratches weren't deep, but they burned like fire, a constant reminder that whatever was in this house didn't just want me gone, it wanted me terrified. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call anyone, but there was no signal. The battery icon flickered erratically before the screen went black altogether, even though it had been fully charged the night before. Fine, I muttered to myself, panic giving way to frustration. You don't want me here? I'm leaving. I didn't care how, I just needed to get out. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my keys, and headed for the front door. To my relief, it opened this time. But the moment I stepped outside, I froze. The world wasn't right. The street was empty, eerily so, with no cars, no people, not even the usual distant hum of the city. A heavy fog hung low to the ground, swallowing everything beyond the front yard. I stepped onto the porch, squinting into the haze. The street lights were on, but their glow barely penetrated the gloom. The houses on either side of mine looked abandoned, their windows dark and lifeless. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding small and distant in the suffocating quiet. No answer. I took another step forward, and that's when I saw them. Figures, barely visible through the fog, standing motionless at the edge of the yard. There were dozens of them, their outlines hazy and indistinct. They didn't move or make a sound, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching. My heart pounded as I backed toward the door, my hands fumbling for the handle. The figures remained still, but the fog seemed to thicken around them, creeping closer like a living thing. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the wood, trying to catch my breath. The house was supposed to be the danger, but now it felt like a sanctuary compared to whatever was out there. That's when I heard the scraping. It started faint, like nails dragging across the floorboards, and grew louder with each passing second. The sound came from above, from the attic. I stared at the ceiling, my pulse racing. Then the whispers began. "You can't leave. You belong to us. Stay." The voices overlapped, dozens of them speaking in hushed, frantic tones. They were everywhere, above me, behind me, even beneath the floorboards. And then, as suddenly as they started, they stopped. A single voice, low, guttural, and unmistakably human, cut through the silence. "Come back to the cellar." I don't know what compelled me to obey that voice. Maybe it was the sheer authority in its tone, or maybe it was the oppressive, otherworldly pull that seemed to emanate from the house itself. Either way, I found myself standing over the trapdoor again, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The furniture I'd shoved over it was gone, as if it had never been there. The trapdoor sat open now, the gaping darkness beneath it beckoning me. "You don't have to do this," I whispered to myself, gripping the flashlight tightly. But deep down, I knew I didn't have a choice. Whatever was down there wouldn't let me leave, not until I faced it. The air grew colder with every step as I descended the stairs, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The jars on the shelves seemed to watch me as I passed, their grotesque contents illuminated in the dim light. This time, I didn't stop to examine them. My focus was on the small wooden door at the back of the cellar. The scratches across its surface seemed deeper now, more violent, as if something had been clawing at it with renewed desperation. My hand shook as I reached for the door, pausing just inches away. "This is insane," I muttered, but the voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like my own, whispered back, "You need to know." I pushed the door open. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the cellar. The stone walls were slick with moisture, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. In the center of the room was a large, circular pit, its edges lined with ancient symbols carved into the stone. Something was moving inside the pit. I stepped closer, my legs trembling beneath me. The light from my flashlight barely penetrated the pit steps, but I could see shapes writhing and shifting below, too many to count, their movements erratic and unnatural. And then I saw it. A face emerged from the darkness, pale and distorted, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. It wasn't human, at least, not anymore. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and from its throat came a guttural, inhuman scream. I staggered back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The pit seemed to come alive, the shapes inside clawing and scrambling toward the surface. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a cacophony of pleading and rage, "Help us! Join us! Run!" I grabbed the flashlight and turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me. The room plunged into darkness, and the whispers grew deafening, surrounding me, suffocating me. Then, a single voice cut through the chaos, low and commanding. "Don't look away." Against every instinct, I turned back toward the pit. The face was closer now, its features more defined. Its lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only malice. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "Now, you belong to us." The floor beneath me began to shift, cracks forming in the stone as the pit expanded. I stumbled, barely managing to stay on my feet. The thing in the pit reached out, its long, gnarled fingers clawing at the edge, pulling itself up inch by inch. I screamed, turning, and pounding on the door with all my strength. "Let me out!" I shouted, my voice raw with panic. The whispers only laughed. The laughter of the whispers filled the room, twisting and spiraling into a cacophony that pressed against my skull. My fists pounded on the door, splinters biting into my palms as I screamed, "Let me out! Please, let me out!" The door didn't budge. Behind me, the creature from the pit continued its slow ascent. Its fingers, long and impossibly thin, scraped against the stone floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I didn't dare turn around, but I could feel its presence growing, an oppressive weight that made the air too thick to breathe. "You've already opened the door," it hissed, its voice a guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "There's no going back now." I gritted my teeth and spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The thing was halfway out of the pit now, its grotesque, elongated body writhing like it didn't belong to this world. Its face, its face was wrong. The features shifted constantly, cycling through expressions of rage, sorrow, and glee as if it were trying on human emotions like masks. Its empty, black eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I couldn't move. "Why me?" I croaked, barely able to force the words out. It smiled, a horrible, jagged smile that split its face in two. "Because you looked," it said simply. The floor shook violently, and the pit widened, cracks racing toward me like spiderwebs. I stumbled, my flashlight beam flailing wildly. The jars on the shelves shattered one by one, releasing a sickening stench as their contents spilled across the floor. From the broken glass, shadows began to rise, thin, spindly figures with glowing eyes that flickered like dying embers. They didn't move toward me. Instead, they stood in a circle around the room, watching silently, their gazes filled with something that resembled pity. "You should have stayed upstairs," one of them whispered. I backed against the door, my hands fumbling for anything I could use as a weapon. My flashlight was useless, its light barely cutting through the thick darkness. The creature in the pit let out a low, guttural laugh, dragging itself fully onto the floor. Its limbs were impossibly long, bending at unnatural angles as it began to crawl toward me. "You've seen too much," it said again, each word dripping with malice. The whispers returned, rising to a deafening crescendo. They weren't just in the room now, they were in my head, a relentless tide of voices drowning out my thoughts. "Run. Stay. Join us. Don't look away." I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The whispers were inside me, consuming me. And then, from somewhere deep within the noise, I heard a single, clear voice, "The key." I blinked, the words cutting through the chaos like a blade. "What?" I whispered, barely able to hear myself over the din. "The key," the voice repeated. It was faint but insistent, like a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I looked around frantically, my eyes landing on the symbols carved into the stone around the pit. They glowed faintly now, pulsating in time with the creature's movements. The cracks in the floor formed a pattern, a twisted, circular design that seemed to converge on a single point near the far wall. The key. I didn't know what it was or if it even existed, but I had to try. I bolted toward the wall, the creature letting out a furious screech as it lunged after me. The shadows moved for the first time, closing ranks around the pit as if trying to hold the creature back. Their forms twisted and flickered, but they didn't break. I reached the wall, my hands scrabbling across the cold stone. There, hidden among the cracks, was a small, rusted key embedded in the rock. I yanked it free, the metal biting into my palm. The instant it came loose, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. Behind me, the creature let out a sound that was half scream, half roar, and the pit began to collapse, sucking the shadows and the creature back into its depths. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The door behind me flew open, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. "Run." The door had opened, but the thing in the pit wasn't letting me go that easily. I didn't stop to question why, my instincts screamed louder than the whispers. I bolted up the stairs, the rusted key clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, the creature roared. The walls of the cellar groaned as if the house itself were alive and furious. I could hear its limbs scraping against the stone as it dragged itself after me, faster now, more desperate. The shadows didn't hold it back for long. They screamed, their forms dissipating like smoke as the creature tore through them. "Run," they cried, their voices rising into a desperate, keening wail. I hit the top of the stairs and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. It wouldn't hold, I knew that much, but it gave me a second to think. The key. It had to mean something. I held it up, turning it over in my shaking hands. The rusted metal was covered in strange engravings, similar to the symbols carved around the pit. The creature slammed against the trapdoor, the wood cracking under the impact. I stumbled back, panic clouding my mind. There had to be something in the house, something the key unlocked. The whispers returned, softer now, guiding me. Upstairs, they said. The attic. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run outside, into the fog, anywhere but further into the house. But the key in my hand seemed to pull me, a faint warmth emanating from it as if it had a mind of its own. The trapdoor shattered behind me, splinters flying as the creature let out another blood-curdling screech. I didn't wait to see it. I turned and ran up the staircase 2 steps at a time. The air grew colder as I climbed, my breath visible in front of me. The walls seemed to close in, the hallway stretching endlessly. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it didn't want me to leave. The whispers grew louder as I reached the attic door. Hurry! Open it! It's coming! I fumbled with the key, my hands trembling so badly that it slipped from my grip. It hit the floor with a metallic clink and skidded under the door. No, no, no! I dropped to my knees, clawing at the floorboards as the creature's heavy, wet footsteps echoed up the stairs. The attic door creaked open on its own, and the key was suddenly back in my hand. I didn't question it. I shoved the door wide and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. The attic was nothing like I'd expected. It was clean and well lit, a stark contrast to the decay of the rest of the house. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate chest, its surface covered in the same symbols as the key. The whispers rose to a fever pitch. Lock it away. Seal it. End this. The creature crashed against the attic door, its claws raking the wood. I didn't have much time. I rushed to the chest, the key fitting perfectly into the lock. As I turned it, the house let out a deep, guttural groan, the walls shaking violently. The creature screamed, a sound so inhuman it made my ears ring. The lid of the chest flew open, and a blinding light poured out, enveloping the room. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the air grew impossibly cold. The creature burst through the door, its twisted form lunging toward me. But the light from the chest stopped it in its tracks. It writhed and screamed, its body dissolving into smoke as the light consumed it. The house shook one final time, then fell silent. The chest's lid slammed shut, the key turning in the lock on its own. I stared at it, my chest heaving, unsure if I'd won or if this was just the beginning. The attic was silent now. No more screeching. No more whispers. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air was gone, leaving only the faint hum of my own breath. I stood frozen, staring at the chest in the middle of the room, still glowing faintly, the key clutched in my hand. For a moment, I thought it was over, that the house had finally released me. But something in my gut told me it wasn't. Not entirely. The house wasn't done with me yet. I stepped cautiously toward the chest, my feet light, as if the floor beneath me might collapse at any second. The symbols on the chest had stopped glowing, and the air was growing warmer, but there was an unsettling stillness. It was too quiet. I reached for the chest, my fingers brushing against the carvings. They felt like they were pulsing with energy, alive, as if they had a heartbeat of their own. And then, I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if it was real or just my mind playing tricks. Don't open it. I jerked back, the key nearly slipping from my hand. The voice was familiar now, no longer a chorus of desperate pleas, but one clear, solid warning. My heart raced. I glanced around the room, but there was no one there. The attic was empty, just me and the chest. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. Don't open it. I felt the cold sweat trickling down my spine. I had to open it, didn't I? The house was still alive, and I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to make a choice. The key was still in my hand, the temptation overwhelming. I swallowed hard, struggling to steady my shaking hand. Every part of me wanted to walk away, to leave the chest locked forever, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. The creature was gone, but the house was still here. And whatever I had done, it wasn't enough. I raised the key. The chest lid creaked open slowly, reluctantly, as if the house itself didn't want me to see what was inside. But I had no choice. Inside, there was only darkness. The key twisted in my hand, the chest opening wider, until I could see nothing but blackness, a darkness so thick it felt like it had weight, like it was pressing against me. Then, a face appeared in the shadows, a face I knew all too well. It was me. A twisted, distorted version of myself, eyes black and hollow, a grin spread across my face that wasn't mine. "You should have stayed away," it hissed. The room started to spin. The walls closed in, the whispers returned, but now they were different, darker, more demanding. The chest slammed shut with a deafening bang. The key was gone. And just like that, the house fell silent once more. I stood in the darkness, unsure of what had just happened. Had I sealed the creature away? Had I truly broken free? Or had I just trapped myself in a nightmare of my own making? The house was quiet, but it was far from empty. And now, I had no idea how to escape. The whispers were still here. And they were waiting for me to make my next move.